And this is where we encountered the surprise that we weren't quite sure about how the client was going to feel. Hey everyone, it's Dylan from the Black Forest Wood Company, and this week we're going to be creating a dining table for our client, but partway through the process we found a surprise that us or the client wasn't expecting, and he almost didn't want to take these slabs. For this table, the client selected a pair of heavily figured Claro walnut slabs that we got from our friends at GL Veneer. There was a couple things specifically that drew them towards these slabs. The first thing was the color. These slabs had a really rich color with a little bit of a red hue to them. And the second thing was the figure in the table. So these slabs have what's called fiddleback figure, and it gets that name because fiddleback wood was most commonly used, as you'd guess, on the back of fiddles. And all that really means, it's this compressed, wrinkled grain that gives a three-dimensional effect when the table is finished. So that's why the client picked these slabs, and we start the process off by rough cutting them to their final size, and then we surface them on our CNC machine to prepare them for the resin pour before they go in the mold. And this is where we encountered the surprise that we weren't quite sure about how the client was going to feel. Along the whole entire edge of these slabs on the sapwood, there was heavy decay caused by actual bug infestation on these slabs. And this is something that walnut can be somewhat susceptible to. If it's left in its log form for too long in the lumber yard, it will begin to decay and you can get these infestations of bugs. And the result on this slab was little wormholes going down the entire edge of the slab. So when we showed the client this partway through the process, they were actually quite surprised, and he didn't know if he wanted to stick with these slabs. So we had to do our best to convince him that based on our experience, these kinds of features, although they may look like imperfections now, they just add to the overall character of the finished table. Fortunately, he decided to proceed with the build. So what we're doing here right now is mixing up our Black Forest deep resin for the first pour. This is going to be a two-stage pour where we're doing a midnight blue base layer to give an opaque layer on the bottom that's going to hide all the mounting plates for the legs. And then once this is partially cured, we're going to follow it up with a clear layer over top. One question that we get a lot is, how do you time these multi-layered pours? So there's two ways you can go about it. First way is you let it fully cure and then you sand the surface to roughen it up before pouring your second layer. That's going to give you a mechanical bond, which is the weaker of the two options. The second way, which is the stronger option, is a chemical bond. So you let your resin partially cure before adding that top layer. And the way to test if it's cured enough that we like to use is we take a popsicle stick, we touch it to that surface of the base layer, and we're looking for the resin to be soft enough that we can easily dent it with the popsicle stick, but not so soft that it sticks to that stick and gives a big string. So once it's at that perfect point, we'll mix up some more of our Black Forest deep resin and we'll come along and pour that top layer. Now, you'll notice you didn't see that second pour. We unfortunately had a hard drive that got corrupted this week, so we did lose a little bit of footage, but fortunately it wasn't too much. So once that pour is done and we've got it downstairs and we've got that excess layer of resin flattened off on our CNC machine, we then take a track saw to the piece to cut it down to its final size. We do have a big panel saw that we could technically fit one of these tables on to cut it down, but we just find it's much easier to bring your tool to the piece instead of bringing your piece to the tool when you're dealing with something this large. Once we've got the piece cut to size on the track saw, then we're sending it through our sander. Now, you'll notice this is the old machine because we filmed it right before the new one came, so it doesn't have the fancy planer head in there, but we have really been loving this new machine, as you guys have seen from that last video. Now we have to take on the very labor-intensive process of making sure all of those little bug holes are filled in. Even though we poured resin over the whole surface to fill them in, once we machine off that layer of resin, we almost always open up a few more bug holes that were sitting just slightly below that surface. So it does introduce a whole nother step to the process of having to go along and individually fill in those little holes. For this process, we use a variety of different products to achieve these fills, depending on how big the void is that we're trying to fill in. For the first stage of the process, we use our Black Forest Coat Thin resin because it's rated to pour slightly larger voids. Not quite as big as our deep resin by any means, but you can see some of the holes on the edge of the table here, 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch thick. So by using our Coat Thin resin, it's going to allow us to get nice clarity in those fills. If we were to try and use a quicker curing resin like our 5-minute quick fix epoxy on something this big, you'd probably be able to see some bubbles in the cured surface. We go along, we do the top, we flip the table on either edge, we do the edges with the Coat Thin, and then we take our sander and we remove all of that excess epoxy that was left from our filling process. Now, you would likely think you're done, but for whatever reason, it's almost impossible to hit all of those holes on your first time around. So you'll do your fills, you'll sand everything off, and then you're going to find a whole new batch of holes that are slightly smaller than the last ones you had to fill in. So then we will switch our product to our Black Forest Quick Fix Epoxy. This is something that only takes about 5 minutes to cure, and it works much better on these really small voids where you're not actually seeing into the table. It's just a little speck where there's no material and it almost looks like a little chip or a hole taken out. We also, for this table, began experimenting with a new product. So we're trying out some UV cure resins. Instead of adding a hardener to them to achieve the cured product, you just use a UV LED cure light and you leave that on there for a few minutes and it cures your resin up nice and hard. So hopefully in the near future, this can be something that we offer to our customers. So technically a feature like this is going to make your build that much more labor intensive and just add to the cost of it. But like I said, if everything's done correctly, it should add to that overall character of the piece when we're done. So after 3 stages of filling to get all of those holes taken care of, we can now come along and put our bevel on the outside edge of the table. So we like to do a 45-degree 2mm bevel on all of our pieces. Sometimes if a table is really large, we'll do one bigger. We actually have an 18-foot by 6-foot table coming up that used 350 liters of resin, and that one got a bigger bevel. So stay tuned for that table because it's our biggest one to date. Once the bevel has been put on, then it's on to the final sanding for this piece before we apply the finish. So we take all surfaces up to 320 grit, and then we can come along with our oil finish to begin saturating all the pores of the grain. So this is something I've talked about a few times before on our channel, but I'll bring it up again, and that's the choice of finish that we offer to our customers. So there's an option of a natural plant-based oil and wax finish, which is what you're seeing us apply right now, or our clients can select a sprayed polyurethane coating. The difference between the two largely comes down to durability. The oil-based finish is less durable than the polyurethane, but it doesn't form as thick of a layer over the piece you're finishing, so it allows you to get a better tactile experience over the surface of the wood, and also allows you to get a little bit more clarity out of the resin so you can see into that beautiful base layer we've poured. The polyurethane is also slightly harder to fix, which may be seen as a downside. If someone picks this oil finish and they get a little water ring or a scratch, it's really easy for them to just apply some of that oil right over the imperfection and get their table looking brand new again. Whereas if they pick the polyurethane, you actually have to sand down to the depth of your scratch and then reapply the coating, which is something that our clients wouldn't be able to do in their own home. Once we've got the finish on, we allow this to sit for 7 days before we can come along and apply our Black Forest ceramic coating. So the oil on its own does a very good job on protecting the piece, but all of those attributes can be increased even farther by the addition of a ceramic coating. So it's going to make your piece hydrophobic, so any liquids that do spill on the surface are going to bead right up instead of soaking in. It's going to increase the contrast, as you can see here. The wood is going to look more brilliant and the resin's going to be more clear. And finally, it's going to increase your scratch resistance on the piece. So any plates or glasses, anything rough that'll get slid on that surface is going to glide right over it as opposed to digging in and scratching. And this has become something that we do not send out a single table without. Now before we can show you guys what this table looked like all finished up, we need to build the base that's going to support it. So our client has opted for one of our signature X bases to sit underneath this table. This is a base that we introduced back around 2018 or 2019, and it was just a custom request. We did a live edge top for a client and he said he wanted 2 X's sitting beneath the table to support it. So this is the design that we came up with, and it has quickly become our most popular base option that we offer. Recently we've even started started selling these bases just as is. So if you have a tabletop that you want one of these X bases on, you can head to our website, fill out our quote form, let us know that all you're interested in is the base, and we can construct one to fit perfectly beneath your table. The way that this base is constructed features some half-lap joinery for the large X. So that's what you're seeing us assemble here right now. All of that is machined on our CNC machine, so we can ensure that it's all going to fit absolutely perfectly, and that's also what allows us to easily customize them for any size of tabletop. So there's two separate glue ups for this base. We assemble that half lap independent first using Titebond 3 as an adhesive, and once that is cured, we can take it out of the clamps and we can begin setting up to assemble the shorter X's around it. You can see that they don't just butt into the edge, but they actually overlap on each side, and this is just for strength. We didn't want to simply be relying on dowels and two flat surfaces meeting each other. We wanted this to completely sandwich that longer X to ensure that none of this joinery could ever fail. Once we've got the first side on, we can stand this base up, and we're using some more Titebond 3 and solid hardwood dowels just to secure all of that joinery, and our final X should slide into place, assuming that we've done everything right here. We leave this in the clamps for 24 hours to cure, and from there we can get it sanded up to begin preparing for the finishing process. Not only has the X base itself become extremely popular, but this finishing technique has also become quite popular on it. So this is what we call our blackened ash finish, and it simply just consists of a solid black stain going over the ash with a clear coat of oil over top. The reason that I think people really like this specifically over the ash is because ash is a wood that has a naturally really coarse grain. So when you stain black over it, it still looks like real wood. You can still make out all of those growth rings and wood patterns, whereas if you were to do this over something like maple, it wouldn't even really look like solid wood anymore. Once our stain is cured, we then come along and put a clear coat of the Black Forest furniture oil over, and you can see that it brings out some gloss, but it almost makes it look more black when you apply this on the surface too. Now that the base is all finished up, we can begin fastening it to the underside of the table. So we fasten all of our bases with 1/4 inch thick recessed steel plates that we try and do our best to land beneath the wood, so you're not going to see any of those plates in the resin. Now this table did have a base layer, but it's just habit for us to try not to cut any of our pockets into that resin, because there is a chance that once you add a threaded insert in, it could poke through that base layer and you just have a really ugly feature in the middle of the table. Once the plates are fastened to the base, we can screw them into the underside of the table using threaded inserts, and then it's time to get this table lifted downstairs and outside for some final photographs. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to go down to deliver this one ourselves, and it is going to get shipped out to our client so they can take care of the delivery. So this is always a part of our process when we don't get to deliver them. The tables just look so much better in the real natural sunlight, and it's arguably one of the most rewarding parts of the entire process. Our whole team gathers outside, we all just sit around and enjoy, and it's a lot of fun to see the payoff for all of our hard work.
We don't want to scratch.
Okay, you're right. Yeah. Oh, that's, I think you're right.
Thank you.
Yeah. You brought it up, buddy. Just sit down. Which slabs were these?
These were like some of the random ones from GL.
Really?
We have
It's
a
got
whole.
everything I love.
I think we have a whole bunch more of them.
I love when they do this with wormholes and you got like
It
full
does just look
clear.
cool. It just looks
Beautiful.
cool.
Love it. I love this one.
And we would absolutely like to know what you guys think about this piece in the comments below. I'm curious to know, would the bug holes have been enough for you to say no to these slabs and want to switch to something else? Or do you like the way that they look and like the character that they've added to the table? Either way, we want to hear what you guys think. Thank you for sticking around until the end of the video, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.